Hello and welcome. We studied a large group of faculty worldwide for their views on the goals of computer science education and on how important they believe it is that we prepare students for industry. The motivation for this study is to potentially gain insights in the persistence of the academia-industry gap in computer science. So this academia-industry gap is a decades-old problem in our community. It has persisted over the years and it still persists today. And this gap is characterized by the differences between the expectations and reality for multiple different groups. So for instance, students expect their university education to prepare them for industry jobs. And this is actually not computer science specific, but we see this phenomenon also in non-CS students. And so students in general expect their education to make them able to secure better jobs. However, after going into industry, students and recent graduates of computer science become somewhat disappointed in their education. A recent study found that around half of computer science students felt that their program did not properly prepare them for industry. And this feeling is also not unique to students. Also, recent graduates as well as employers report an expectation gap. And more specifically, employers, they report a gap between university graduates' abilities, including both technical and non-technical skills. And some examples are listed here. Outside of the scientific community, the academia-industry gap in computer science is also a known phenomenon. So for instance, if you go online and you look for articles written by practitioners, you can find many practitioners who voiced their concern about this gap. And so here I just list some of the concerns that I found. And so as I said before, this problem that we're dealing with is at least 20 years old. And so it has persisted over the years, still persists today, but why is the question? Well, maybe we forgot to study an essential stakeholder in this gap. So the faculty view on this topic actually remains relatively unstudied. And, well, why should we study what their views are? Well, faculty are ultimately, of course, the ones who will need to take action if we want to close this gap. And the next popular quote shows that maybe faculty will not be willing to do that. So this quote could potentially be responsible for the persistence of the academic industry gap. In other words, the question we're asking is it possible that faculty views on undergraduate computer science education are causing the persistence of this gap? And so this is actually a question that had not yet really been researched, so we decided to study this. And because this is a somewhat controversial topic, we decided to frame our research questions a little more general. So we want to know what faculty believe are the goals of a computer science education. How do they view the role of their institution in preparing students for industry? And also, what do they think they can do better in terms of preparing students for their careers? And so in deciding how to study these questions, it's important that we avoid including only views limited to our imagination. So we decided to run a qualitative study. So we actually previously ran a qualitative study with these research questions, and we interviewed faculty. This is actually a study that's published at 6E 2020. And we ran a phenomenography analysis on our data to identify the full range of beliefs exhibited by the participants. So what we found from our interviews is that many faculty actually do support providing better industry preparation. However, also some faculty oppose this. And our interviews also revealed several barriers that keep faculty from providing more industry-relevant content in their courses. And so while our qualitative study did show us that there's hope that we will be able to close this gap in the future, we do need more quantitative data to establish the relative support for these opposing views that we found, as well as how common these barriers are that we uncovered. And so that is why I'm presenting this study today, where we are examining the views of the broader community of computer science faculty. And so this qualitative work, we ran a survey that was informed from the findings from our previous interviews study. And for this survey, participants were recruited through email. The details on that are in the paper. But in all, we emailed over 7,500 faculty, and we had 249 responses. Of these responses, most respondents were men from large public computer science programs at large institutions. And then for our results, so this graph shows a 5-point Likert scale from not at all important on the most left to extremely important on the right. And we aligned the bars so that the center of the neutral, so that's moderately important in this case, is right under the dotted line here. And so we see that the top two most important goals of computer science, according to faculty, are for students to become competent problem solvers and for students to learn how to program. Both of these have very high numbers of faculty who rate it as extremely important. Goals deemed not that important by faculty are here on the bottom. And so some examples of those are to keep the program up to date with industry, for students to figure out their next step in life, for students to attain a breadth of general knowledge outside of CS, and to offer many opportunities to explore other interests. We also find that for many of the skills that get mentioned in studies on this academia-industry gap, the skills that are relevant for industry, we see actually strong faculty support for many of these skills. And we also see the support for industry relevance reflected in the results of the following question. So we asked faculty whether preparing students for careers in industry should be a principal goal of an undergraduate computer science education. And we see here that this is again a 5-point Likert scale, this time from strongly disagree on the left to strongly agree on the right. And again, we aligned the bars so that the center of the neutral bar appears under the dotted line. And so we find that industry is stronger supported here as a goal of a computer science program than academia. And if we look deeper into this, we see that both for preparation for industry as well as for academia, faculty believe that the responsibility primarily lies with their own university. And for industry, we see that faculty believe the companies have a higher remaining responsibility, whereas for academia, faculty believe that the students have the higher remaining responsibility. But the main takeaway here is that the universities are the primarily responsible party here. So that brings us to our first two conclusions. So most faculty support industry preparation, though there is definitely a group we found who disagrees also. And we also found that universities, according to faculty, carry the bulk of the responsibility for industry preparation. So now we might ask, if faculty support all this, then why do we have a problem? Why does this gap keep persisting? Now, what can we do better? And so we actually asked faculty also which things they believed could be done better to prepare students for careers in industry. And so again, this is a 5-point Likert scale, and the green bars here on the right are not applicable votes. And so here we see that many of the industry-specific skills were actually predominantly seen as very important in the previous graph, are here listed as things that we should be doing better in our teaching. We also see that faculty believe that there are at least some things that we can do better in terms of preparing students for industry, but only few faculty support radical changes in the way that we teach. So to come back to the conclusions here, so we found that most faculty do support teaching more industry relevant content. So what is keeping faculty from doing better at doing so? And so we actually asked faculty if they experienced some barriers, some of these barriers that we discovered in our interview study. And the most frequently experienced barriers here, so these are barriers that keep faculty from providing more industry relevant content in their courses. Now, the most frequently experienced ones are pertaining to industry or awareness of industry best practices among teaching assistants or faculty themselves. And one interesting thing to note here is the large number of non-applicable responses for the teaching assistants. And we found that this group consists for a large part of faculty from small computer science department, likely because these faculty do not have teaching assistants. And we also found that most faculty disagree with the statement that industry-relevant content does not belong in their course. However, we found that this does vary per course area. So there are certain course areas, such as algorithms and complexity, as well as programming languages, for which we find a relatively sizable number of faculty who do believe that industry-relevant content does not belong in their course. And so those faculty are on the right in this graph, to the right of the center. And so this is not perhaps that surprising for theory-heavy areas such as algorithms, but a little more surprising for programming languages, perhaps. And we actually had one programming languages faculty email us with an explanation that they believe that academia is ahead of industry in their field and that teaching industry-relevant content would be counterproductive. However, we do not know how many faculty hold similar views here. Areas with large support for teaching industry-relevant content are artificial intelligence, software engineering, and introduction to programming. Okay, so to come back to these barriers, so there's not clearly any barrier that everyone experiences and another barrier that no one experiences. And also, if we look at the number of barriers experienced per faculty, we find that there's not a clear group, not a clear split between groups of faculty who experience all of the barriers and a group of faculty who experience none of the barriers. Most faculty seem to experience at least a number of barriers. So that brings us to our final conclusions. What is keeping faculty from doing better at teaching industry-relevant content? Well, we found that support here varies per course area, right? So it might depend on which course a faculty teaches, how likely they are to support teaching more industry-relevant content. And then there are a number of barriers, such as lack of awareness of industry best practices, which make improvement difficult. And the characteristics and remediations of these barriers remain yet to be understood, so we need future work to study this. This study was in part supported by the National Science Foundation, and feel free to contact me with any questions at avalstar@ucsd.edu. Thank you for your attention.